J.D. Vance makes Donald Trump's very short VP list. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. By all appearances, J.D. Vance has been working hard to be former President Donald Trump's running mate. He's hosted fundraisers, he sat in court with Trump during his trial, and blasted the prosecution outside the New York courthouse. Well, those efforts may pay off. Trump this week said he has asked a select few Republicans for vetting materials to be VP. Senator Vance is among them, along with Senators Marco Rubio of Florida and Tim Scott of South Carolina, as well as North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. Herb Asher, of those names, how does J.D. Vance stack up, if you include all those?
He's as competitive as the others. Probably Marco Rubio is more of a national star, but that would probably not be very good in terms of competing with President Trump or candidate Trump or whatever. J.D. Vance is an amazing story because just a few years ago, he uttered some of the harshest words about Donald Trump. He basically compared Trump to Hitler, and it doesn't get much worse than that. So he has spent quite a bit of time making up to Trump, and as you say, he's now introduced legislation demanding that the Justice Department do an investigation of the prosecutor and the judge in the New York case, and so he's, as you said, he's doing everything possible to win Trump's favor.
Bob, 8 years ago, Mike Pence helped Donald Trump win over evangelical Christians, so it helped him defeat Hillary Clinton. What does J.D. Vance bring to Donald Trump's ticket, or what are these other? Is there any one of these candidates who brings him something he doesn't already have?
Well, I mean, you could probably say all of them could bring something. Marco Rubio might help with Hispanics. Obviously, you know, President Trump doesn't have to worry about Ohio. He's going to easily carry Ohio again. I think it's going to be somewhere between 10 and 15 points this time. However, I think the one thing J.D. Vance does bring to the ticket, and this is a big issue this year, is he'll be the first millennial on a national ticket. And we have an age issue in this campaign, and maybe he can help the Trump campaign with those millennials that are out there. I mean, nobody's really paying a lot of attention to them, but they've become a very big voting bloc.
He said some fundraisers. He had one in Cincinnati. J.D. Vance did for Donald Trump, or at least he attended one with the former president. Apparently went out in Silicon Valley this week. So that could be a factor, too, the amount of money he can raise.
Yeah, certainly that helps his resume. I think the fundraising ability, I think the connections there. I think his relationship with Donald Trump Jr. has also been written about quite a bit, and also just the loyalty factor. That's something that Donald Trump is looking for.
No woman on this ticket, on this short list. Now, if you believe this is the true short list, there could be others out there, but this is the list that he put out this week. Not one woman on that list, though.
Yeah.
Carol.
Well, I'm not sure actually he put it out. It's just sort of that ephemeral supporters and all that stuff. You know, Donald Trump always has wiggle room to change his mind at the last minute. We know that. We've seen that. I think Jesse hit it on the head as far as J.D. Vance. The relationship with Donald Trump Jr., I almost like the national media has been a little late to the party on that. That was critical in getting J.D. Vance the endorsement of President Trump. Gee, was it just really 2 years ago? And thus winning that Senate primary and then beating Tim Ryan in the general election.
Herb, does it matter?
J.D. Vance won't make much of a difference in Ohio or nationally, but he brings two other things for Trump. One is that they both sort of agree on foreign policy issues, that J.D. Vance has gone out of his way to indicate that he really is, I'll use the phrase, the Putin wing of the party, not very supportive of Ukraine, not that happy about NATO, and that's certainly where Trump stood or stands. And then also, J.D. Vance is very, very close to Peter Thiel, who's provided a lot of money. He's the founder of PayPal and all of that. So another source of California money, if you will.
In the end, Bob, will it really matter? People are going to vote for Donald Trump regardless of who his VP pick is at this point?
Sure. I mean, I don't know. And you mentioned 8 years ago with Mike Pence. I think there was 8 years ago some questions about Donald Trump that, especially with the evangelicals, that Mike Pence helped resolve. Now, Donald Trump, and we'll get into it later when we talk the next subject, but so many people have such firm opinions about Donald Trump that it's not like any one thing can really change it all that much.
Yeah, people used to talk about vice presidential selections as providing balance. As Bob just said, Trump really doesn't need balance. Pence helped 8 years ago, but you see so many examples where George Herbert Walker Bush picked Dan Quayle because they wanted to get an age-youth balance. What a disaster, but he won. And John McCain picked Sarah Palin.
That hurt him.
Yeah, it hurt him. And Bill Clinton picked Al Gore. It was actually just 2 Bill Clintons on the ticket. No balance there. But so this whole concept of balance doesn't have as much relevance, especially when you have a strong candidate like Donald Trump.
Jesse, none of these. Donald Trump is going to win all these 4 states: North Dakota, Ohio, South Carolina, Florida, maybe, but he's still favored there heavily. So Rubio's not really going to help him there either.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it before. Perhaps Rubio brings in the Latino Hispanic vote. But yeah, these are places where Trump is doing quite well. So you're not bringing in votes because of that. But I don't know if anyone's really looked to vice presidential candidates for that for a bit now.
Kristi Noem, Daryl, not going to happen. The dog issue is just not hanging over
There's
her
too
head.
many dog owners in America.
I think, there's about 45 bad jokes. Now, spare, I'll try to keep your ratings up, so we won't go there.
And Nikki Haley, there was some speculation in that she said she was going to vote for Trump,
Yeah.
that she might be
I think there's
working onto
personal
that list.
distaste. From sitting here in Columbus, I think there's personal distaste on the part of the former president for his former opponent there. And we got to say, if Rubio is seriously considered, somebody's got to move out of Florida. Can't have 2 candidates on the ticket from Florida. So I doubt if it's a guy in Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
So see how that works.
All right. We still don't know what impact Donald Trump's conviction will have on the presidential race. It's only been a week. One national poll indicates a slight erosion of support. Here in Ohio, just about every Republican office holder has lined up solidly behind the former president, J.D. Vance, of course. But others have denounced the prosecution. Congressman Jim Jordan called it a kangaroo court. Secretary of State Frank LaRose called it a sham trial. Attorney General Dave Yost called the New York prosecutor unethical. And U.S. Senate candidate Bernie Moreno put out an ad this week criticizing Sherrod Brown, his opponent, for not condemning the prosecution. Daryl, remember the days when a criminal conviction would doom a political candidacy? Is there any harm on all of these folks really just doubling down on Donald Trump? Any risk?
We are in this brave new world, and I don't know where it stops, Mike. It's so hard, Herb and I and Bob, we have all these years of experience, and it's like, you might as well just flush it, at this point, the calculus. Now, I have seen, again, it's still early in the polling world, and of course, we're light years away from the election. But we talk about how the polls didn't move much. Well, that could be the story of this election, because people, I think, are pretty well locked in. This is a rematch. Everybody knows Biden. Everyone knows Trump. What's going to move it? And it's almost like if you're being talked about, if you're sort of the current controversy of the day, you fade a little bit in the polls. The New York Times did a fascinating study where they went back to a previous poll, called the exact same people again.
The most recent one, yeah.
Yeah. And again, there was maybe 2, 3, 4%, which ain't much. And you talk about margin of errors and all that stuff. But that could decide this race. And again, it's all going to be, watch out for the national polls. They'll say one thing, but it's about 7 key states that really matter in this race.
Jesse, Mike DeWine bluntly refused when asked about the conviction. He said, nope, not going to talk about it.
Yeah, I think we've all learned don't ask Mike DeWine yes or no questions because you'll just get a pretty short stop there. But beyond that point, yeah, I don't think this is a topic that Governor DeWine really wants to focus on. He wants to talk about Ohio. He and Donald Trump have had kind of an interesting relationship over the years. Obviously, DeWine was co-chair for Trump's campaign in Ohio, and they both have endorsed one another. But he was certainly, Governor DeWine was certainly not eager to be at a bunch of Trump rallies recently. And this is a guy who was a former prosecutor, a former attorney general. So I think Governor DeWine respects rule of law quite a bit.
But he didn't even say that Bob. He didn't say just, I disagree with the jury, but we got to respect the jury's decision, which would have been a pretty milquetoast thing to say anyway.
Well, he's at a point in his career where he really doesn't have a dog in this fight, so why jump in it, I think what Daryl was saying is really what's going on with this race. If you look at this race, it's been fairly stable for the last 7 or 8 months. I mean, they're either tied or one slightly ahead, the other one slightly. It's not really budging, even when you're looking at the battleground states. Not a lot of movement. I just think with Donald Trump and to some extent Joe Biden, it's baked in. There's nothing that is going to happen out there between now and November that's, I think, going to shake this all up very much.
Herb Sherrod Brown would only say that no one is above the law and that he'll leave it to voters to decide the issue in November. So he didn't say much either.
He said a very smart thing. That's exactly what you should be saying, that nobody's above the law, and that should be the Democratic mantra. And then other people can sort of elaborate upon that.
Why wouldn't he say we should not have a convicted felon in the White House? Why not just go one smidge further?
He doesn't have to do that right now. He'll have time to say that.
Does that hurt him if he does that now?
Well, it depends on, again, he does get some support from people who like some of Trump's policy on trade and things like that. In fact, he was on trade policy Trump before Trump was on the scene.
Well, I just saw one of Sherrod's ads, and he talks about all the bills he introduced that Donald Trump signed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, is he endorsed by Trump or what?
This sounds like I don't think Sherrod Brown's going to go as far as Tim Ryan did. But this was the strategy Tim Ryan used when he lost to J.D. Vance.
Exactly. And, Sherrod Brown is an incredible campaigner that we've seen over and over again in this state. But what he's doing now, I think, is, I mean, as Bob said, it could be Trump by 10, 15, and I don't think any of us are going to shout him down on that. That means, though, if Sherrod Brown wants to win, he's got to win those voters over to his column. He is, in terms of news releases and public events, he has done a lot to try to distance himself from the Biden administration. Even it's just on the tiniest things. It's almost like the Bill Clinton of the 1990s. They make this little thing really big. But yeah, he's got to win over those Trump voters.
And to that point, he's not going to win over those voters by calling Trump a convicted felon. So you got to play the cards right in a state like Ohio.
And Jesse, Bernie Moreno's ad, basically full-throated, is saying the trial was rigged and Sherrod Brown should call him out. All he needs to do, all Bernie Moreno needs to do, is hang on to every one of Donald Trump's voters, and he wins the seat, right?
That seems to be working pretty well for Republicans in the past several elections.
The danger for Trump is that they can go overboard on this. And if they keep on talking about the judicial system is corrupt, the election system is corrupt, everything's corrupt except me, I think at some point then there will be some people at the margins who will say, wait a second, he should not have a second term.
Yeah. And the one you talk about being baked in, and I totally agree with that, except we have a debate coming up, just a couple weeks, basically.
The 27th.
That is going to get a lot of eyeballs on it, and wow, there's going to be a lot of judgment from body language and manner of speaking and everything rendered on that.
And you're right, and I think that's going to be one of the things that could change this, but it also gets to what I think is going to be the bigger issue, bigger than this conviction, which is age, which is Joe Biden's age. And I think the debate is going to be really telling whether it's going to be an issue or it's not going to be an issue.
Okay. The new law to change the rules for Ohio issues campaigns may have unintended or perhaps intended consequences. As part of the effort to put Joe Biden's name on the November ballot in Ohio, lawmakers passed a law that bans foreign contributions to state issues campaigns. Supporters say it will prevent foreign influence. Opponents of the law, say donations were already illegal. The law also gives new authority to the state attorney general to investigate and prosecute issues campaigns for violations, something that has been the responsibility of the bipartisan Ohio Elections Commission. Critics say that move puts too much power in the hands of a partisan politician. Jesse Balmer, what are advocates saying? Are they saying this new law is going to change how issues campaigns are run here in Ohio? Will it have a big impact?
I think if you're an opponent of this particular change, and let's be honest, mostly Democrats, they're concerned about Attorney General Dave Yost having too much power to investigate kind of any entity that he might see fit. The most obvious one is a dark money group that's been donating to various progressive causes in recent elections, but it could be other organizations in Ohio. And so do you trust the Attorney General, who is the state's top cop and the state's top attorney, to do this in a responsible manner?
What does Dave Yost say about this? Has he commented on this at all?
He's put out a statement. His office put out a statement basically saying, I didn't ask for it, but I'll take it if you give it to me.
He's promising to be fair, I assume.
I'm not even sure that was actually in there. I don't know.
He's Attorney General. He's assumed to be fair,
well, I guess
okay?
so. But you know what? This is one where I've closely questioned a lot of these folks involved, a lot of the proponents about, because they are saying explicitly on the floor of the legislature that not only is there potential foreign money, there actually is foreign money that was in Ohio last year, helped pass the abortion issue, helped pass a August special, the constitutional amendment then. It's going to be in the redistricting issue, which is the really big boogeyman on the ballot for Republicans. And I say, show me how. Show me how. They're claiming that not only is it foreign money, it's all $14 million of that money is foreign. When it's gone from the foreign donor, okay, he's foreign, but it goes to a middle person. Yeah. One of these dark money groups. Why do we call them dark money? Because you can't trace the money.
The story
so how
is
do you say it's
a Swiss
foreign?
billionaire gave money, he lives in Wyoming, gave money to a national group, and that national group contributed money to the abortion rights campaign. But Bob, we don't know that for sure.
Well, we don't, but you know what? As strongly, and by the way, I didn't have Democrats wanting untraceable foreign dollars money on my 2024 scorecard. But the mere fact they're fighting it this much tells me they're gaining from it. I don't have to have it. I mean, just the mere fact that they're fighting tooth and nail to allow this kind of money in our state tells me they're getting it, or they wouldn't be fighting it.
Well, don't you think it might fit into the whole narrative of the voter suppression that's going on too?
Well, it fits into the narrative that, there's all this too much money in our politics. I thought this was something Democrats always said about Republicans. We're always taking this corporate Citizen United money, which is dirty money, and you're using it in your campaigns, and it's never reported. I mean, my God, this stuff is foreign money. It's not unreported American dollars. It's unreported foreign dollars.
Republicans seem to be concerned about foreign money in issue campaigns. How about foreign money in candidate campaigns, state and national?
Isn't that already illegal?
I think we'll find out that people manage to get people who are not American citizens but have residency here or have other means of contributing to other groups. In fact,
So are you okay with foreign dollars coming in?
Are you okay with candidate campaigns being
No, I don't
excluded
think
from
we
it?
should have any foreign dollars.
That's fine then.
Jesse,
That's not what they propose, though.
But Jesse, the problem is if you can't trace the money because it's secret and undisclosed through these dark money groups, until they change that on the national level, there's no way you're going to know for sure that foreign money is not coming in, right?
Yeah, and I think there have been proposals in Ohio. Some of them have been bipartisan to require more disclosure from 501c4s and other groups that currently aren't required to disclose their donors. And so that would be one way to find out what kind of money is being spent on elections and ballot issues and candidates, both foreign and domestic.
And Darrell, that's gone nowhere. This is the post-House Bill 6 reform effort that really just went nowhere.
Right. Well, there's two things. There's, Senator Bill DeMoore, the senator who represents, I think, right where we're sitting, actually proposed what he called a clean bill where it would ban foreign contributions, but the Ohio Elections Commission, bipartisan group, would enforce it and not a partisan attorney general.
That didn't work either. Well, anyway, Central Ohio voters this fall will decide whether to raise taxes to pay for an ambitious plan to build a bus rapid transit system. If approved, it would impose a 3/4 cent sales tax for COTA. That's a 1/2 cent higher than COTA's current temporary tax. It would raise $6 billion for the project. Plans call for 3 rapid bus lines, one on the east side, one on the west side, and a third to the northwest part of the city. Bob Clegg, we're talking about 3/4 of a cent for every dollar you spend. Is that a good use of taxpayer money for this project?
Well, you know me, Mike.
I
don't want taxpayer dollars being used for anything. But the thing that bothers me about this proposal is COTA admits that ridership is way down, and we're in obviously a post-COVID world. But their attitude is of if we build it, they will come. I have a real problem with that because I'm not sure. I understand public transit is very important. I understand that there are a lot of people whose livelihoods depend on it. We got to have it. But this idea of we need to expand it so that we can bring more people in, I'm not there. I mean, I just don't think that's going to happen.
Herb, the argument is the city is growing, so we're going to need more transportation options. And if you have a rapid bus transit system, you don't have to wait an hour for the bus. More people will use it. It's a chicken and egg thing, though.
That's right. But I think the projections, and I think Morpsey's been working on this, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, the population estimates for Columbus and Franklin County in the region are just growing astronomically. And so there's this notion here that we need a better transportation system. One of the challenges here is that a lot of people in Central Ohio don't realize that how crowded the roads are. And anybody who's moved in from the East Coast or the West Coast say, this is paradise. It's so easy to, the commute is only 40 minutes, you know. And so I think the COTA and other groups really have a sales job here to explain what is the benefit now and in the longer term for the community. And getting people to raise taxes for a benefit that doesn't really occur until the future is a hard sell unless you really do a very good job on it. One comment. Oh, remember when Bob Weiler suggested
Free COTA.
Free COTA.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, you know, that might actually be a very wise proposal to consider. It got rejected summarily.
Well, his argument was it's a big amount of money, but it's still a fairly small percentage of the budget. Jesse, I came back from Minneapolis not too long ago, and they have the rapid bus, they have also had light rail, but they have the rapid bus system, and they have bus lanes and bike lanes. And when you drive through that city, there's no traffic that I found. It's sort of symbolic of a changing, more progressive city that might be more attractive to a younger person looking to move here. Is that part of this equation as well?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a factor that Columbus could be considering. I think the question is, looking to your point, like, are people not taking this because it's not convenient? It's going to take them a really long time. It's not, you know, how they want to be transporting themselves, or are they not taking it because they just summarily would rather drive? It's hard to tell.
The argument, Daryl, for the bus system rather than light rail is you don't have to put tracks down. It's easier to move a light rail, a bus rapid transit line than it is to move a light rail line. What do you think of that?
And I tell you, light rail has just not caught fire in this town.
No, it's repulsive to this town for some reason. there is a visceral opposition to anything on a rail in this town.
I think you're right. And now we're so big, and you know, right away questions. It would be a massive undertaking. But you know, there's always kind of this image problem with the bus. You know, first it's like, oh, look at that big old bus. There's 2 people riding on it, right? Yeah. How's that paying off? And then it's like, I would take the bus, but it's that first mile and last mile to get on and off the bus. Now we have a new vision, and you know, it's just like Herb said, they have a vision to sell to the public, and one for the future, not for right now. It's a challenge.
It's a tax hike, but it's, you know, no one's really, you're going to notice it, but it's pennies, basically. Could that alone kill this? Not the fact that it's bus transportation and no one rides the bus?
I mean, we saw last November so many school issues that went down. And I just think the electorate is getting to a point. I mean, people feel under stress, personal, financial, right now. Yeah. And I think that kind of an environment is not good if you're trying to pass something like this.
Right, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. Bob, you're up first.
We were talking about the presidential race, you know, all the TVs in those 7 battlegrounds. I think 2 states sometime this summer will start getting TV, and I think those 2 states are Virginia and Minnesota. And it'll be interesting to see which of the two campaigns place TV first in those states.
All right. Herb.
If Donald Trump selects J.D. Vance as his running mate, and if they win in November, then Donald Trump should request of his Secret Service detail, keep a close eye on my vice president.
Wow. Daryl, top that one.
I thought the next step was going to be, and then Mike DeWine will appoint himself. But well, okay, we're not there. I think journalists are going to have a really tough year again. It was underscored to me as I researched and wrote about this whole deal about the foreign money coming into Ohio. I talked to the former U.S. attorney, the guy who started prosecuting Larry Householder. He said, this is bunk. I talked to the best national campaign finance experts I know. They say this is bunk. Yet it's repeated again and again and again in all the debates, in all the public appearances and all that. So what does a journalist do? You call them out again, but they keep using it. What are we to do in situations like that?
Jesse.
Yeah, I'd just like to direct your attention to a really great investigation that my colleagues Laura Bischoff and Aaron Glid did recently, looking at deaths within county jails. Some of these situations are just really horrifying, and the videos attached to them. But one proposal that Governor DeWine talked about is maybe sheriffs should not be investigating jail deaths.
Interesting. Well, after a comment, talk about those empty buses, those 8 lanes on the outer belt in the middle of the night. They're also pretty empty. Public transportation. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Watch us on our website, wosu.org/COTR, on YouTube and on the PBS video app. For our crew and our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.